System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.
I'm TMK for Inner City Left. I am here with my partner in crime, MFA holder and geopolitical expert. We always have such a friend vibe. I want to make sure that they know, you're not coming from nothing. Like, this man is up here with a background and understanding. How are you doing today, bro?
Man, published essayist, author, you know what I'm saying?
Rapper, just released a album last week.
What really matters, because that's what speaks to the streets, which is always what's my bet for Inner City Left. You know what I'm saying? It's like, the people don't care about it. You know what I'm saying? It really don't matter the work that you did, you know? Any rate.
I
digress.
No one cares. We're just individuals. We're just individuals in this world.
Just talking, just people that talk a lot.
Yeah, but we're just individuals living in the macro, and things are happening around us. And let's talk about those things. A big surprise yesterday, or I don't want to say a big surprise, because we know that the media always loves to downplay the left when the left wins anything. But it looks like in France, at least the parliamentary elections. I'm going to just read a little bit from here and, take this with a grain of salt, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it. It looks like the New Popular Front, which is a block of 190 officials that are like the French's left coalition. So this is kind of like if you were to put the Green Party with, the Libertarian Party, with the Socialist Party, with so on and so forth, a consolidation of the left-leaning parties. Like I said, New Popular Front won 26.9% of the vote and picked up 178 seats. Those are the most seats after the election which ousted Macron and put in Le Pen. What are your thoughts on this? What are your feelings on this? And what does this mean for France and the larger European community?
So one of the things that was interesting, right, is because it's France and you have to write about it. The AP writes about the story. And what do they say? French vote gives leftists most seats over far right, but leaves hung parliament in deadlock. So, let's talk about, right, what their positions are that are causing deadlock, right? They want to raise the minimum wage. They want to lower the legal retirement age from 64 to 60. They want to build 1 million new affordable housing units in 5 years. They want to freeze the prices of basic necessities, including food, energy, and gas, right? And they want, and like all education cost associated with children's education, including meals, all of that is to be borne at the expense of the state. So,
and that's what's holding things up, right?
That's what's holding it up. That's what's causing the deadlock, right? Oh, and they're going to recognize Palestine as a state if they can get that supermajority. So I think it's a couple of things that's interesting. First, the hubris of Macron to assume automatically he was going to win, and he didn't, right? So at first, Le Pen was winning, and everybody thought that her coalition was going to get it. But in the reality, all of these different leftist organizations that no one thought could work together, working together and coalitioning, right? Again, the far right is winning in a lot of places. Some places, the left is winning. You know who's winning nowhere? Centrist. And that's what Macron is seeing. Macron would rather burn the whole government down than make the slightest concession to these leftists. The one thing that the far right and the leftists have in common, though, is both of them want to see a de-escalation of hostilities with the Russians in Ukraine. So once again, all of this bodes bad for Zelensky. Zelensky curse strikes again. You have a whole nother leader out on their butt after risking their entire political career. But more than that, the safety of the world on this bet, for BlackRock. Let's just be honest about it.
Yeah, and we also see that this is also happening in Germany. Well, not with the leftist party. I mean, Germany's going further to the right.
AfD, I mean, those guys are pretty close to Nazis, but they don't get along with the Ukrainian Nazis. That's what's really weird.
It's like when there's like two sets of Crips in an area, and it's like, these Crips don't mess with these Crips. And you're like, wait a minute, aren't y'all both Crips? It's just an understanding we don't have because we're not there in the culture.
And it is important to acknowledge the AfD are German nationalists, which means German white nationalists. And Ukrainians are hardcore, old-fashioned, pie in the sky. We want to bring back the Third Reich Nazis. Like, I think in Germany, even still, that's a bridge too far, right? Because even the AfD is kind of not for continuing escalations with Russia. They're looking to normalize. So, you know, as right-wing as it gets in the West right now, you know, I mean, there's a couple of political parties in Poland. I guess they could give the AfD a run for their money, but these are pretty hardcore German nationalists.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I mean, I think, again, people could push, you know, I'm not saying I'm an expert in the most powerful European countries and their cultures, but it does seem like France and Germany are two of the biggest players in the EU, if not the two biggest. And they're both, and NATO, and they're saying, and the elected officials are saying, oh, we don't really want to support this thing that's happening in Ukraine. No. Macron took he either took a risk or he knew this was going to happen. He wanted to take a step out. He wanted to reevaluate his situation just to see how it goes. And you now see that, you know, the leftist parties are coming into power. We're going to see what happens. And I don't want to give too much credit to the French voters, sure, but let's see what happens. And I think that's what many people are saying with the French elections.
With new elections, unless you're talking about a candidate that you've dealt with before, where you have a track record, like I pretty much know what I'm going to get out of Maduro, you know, in his new term. I pretty much have a pretty good understanding of what's going to happen.
And Maduro just won, by the way, a landslide victory. Maybe it was all rigged, right? You know,
right?
Why don't they rig Zelensky's? Juan Guaido didn't get a single vote. That's a good point.
Yeah, I pretty much know what Lula's going to do. You know, but I don't know what this French coalition of leftists are going to do. They haven't had power before. And what you campaign on and what you can accomplish are very different things. But they campaign on some things far to the left of the Americans. And it's just, I mean, I know we're going to get on to Joey B in just a little bit, but I just got to say, these are the ways that the Democrats shoot themselves in the foot. Because Joey B was always supposed to be some type of patch candidate for right now, the consensus pick until we can do a better pick. And what France shows is if the Democrats had the foresight of keeping AOC in the squad, right, at least nominally to the left of Joe Biden, as opposed to hinging their entire careers on the ups and downs of this, let's be kind and say centrist, but truly, in Ronald Reagan era, he'd be an absolute Republican.
We always say it was bad back. It was bad back then, and it's way worse now. Right. Let's go into that then, since you brought it up. I want to just read this. This was on the CNN. This is them quoting one of an anonymous Democratic donor. An anonymous Democratic donor was blunt about the state of play and the party's choices. I don't think President Biden is going anywhere, the donor told CNN. That is the old horse we've got, and we need to ride him till he's ready for the glue factory. End quote. He's came out now. I'm Joey B. I mean, came out and doubled down on the fact that he is going to be running for this upcoming election, presumably against Donald Trump. What are your thoughts on this? What are your feelings on this? And what's happening? Even
the language that he's using to demonstrate he's the decider, right? But not in as authoritative way as George W. Bush. I'm the decider, right? You don't get that. You get this man who's saying things like, I'm perfectly okay. I run the world. While, a day later making a speech about being the first Black woman president, the first president of
Delaware.
I mean, right. See, you have these kind of things where the messaging day to day are different. And it shows that even his handlers don't know what they're going to get day to day. And we've been seeing signs of this for a long time. I go back to last year when President Xi came to the United States, and Blinken had done all that work to kind of get a photo op with, Biden and Xi. And then, Biden immediately destroys it. It's like he forgot everything that Blinken had told him to do or say because he's clearly being handled. He's being handled by people.
It reminds me when he was when Xi came to San Francisco.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, right.
Right.
And then he called them an authoritarian. I mean, he did this with MBS too. He can't stop doing. It's not like he just started doing this.
Right.
He ruined it with MBS, which is why he got the pound. Remember the pound? They didn't know what they were going to do. Anyway, sorry, let me cut you off. But
it's
the same thing.
The point, right? When we talk about the 5% truth of Trump, right? That's one of the things that Trump said that was very true. World leaders don't freaking respect Joe Biden. They don't respect him. They don't like him. And so they just see him as something you have to deal with, right? That will go away, and that's the thing. Like the world's pulse, even Netanyahu, where he had there was a scandal about a month or two ago where his kids were there were some young people associated with Netanyahu talking about Biden's senility, and Netanyahu's like, oh, we can't publicly admit that, right? Like everyone knows that he's not a man who is, let's say, mentally constant, right? You just don't know what you're going to get one day. They talk about the instability of Trump, but this is a lot more of the same, right? Where you literally don't know, day one to day two where he stands because he doesn't know. This is really dangerous when you're talking about handlers because there's some decisions, right, that only a president can make. For example, launching a nuclear strike, or deciding absolutely to sanction a country. Like these are the kind of things that people in your administration can talk about, but they can't sign their name on these things. They can't make these things. Even if you're handling the president, at the end of the day, the president has to put his name on some of these things. And when you have a person who day to day, you don't know how he's going to feel about these things, that's dangerous.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, I think there's 2 points I want to make, and I'll throw it back to you. Number one is if the Democrats truly want to improve their chances, instead of all this conversation about changing candidates, why don't they just do something? They have the presidency still. They have the ability to do things like, cancel student loan debt. And they don't do that. So that's one. Number two, I think it's important to acknowledge that Joe Biden is the perfect candidate for the Democratic Party and the deep state at large. Here is a malleable, old, senile dotard that you can probably convince into anything. You ever have a situation or see one of these true crime stories where there's an old or any really, it's been done so often that, heist movies and all these things. You get an old person who doesn't quite have all their mental faculties and you get them to sign over their will or sign over their money to you. Why would the Democrats pass up an opportunity to have another presidency where they can run the show?
This is where the Republicans, right, tend to be more, shall we say, efficient in how they organize power, right? You had this similar scenario with possibly a demented Ronald Reagan towards the end of his term, but who's his vice president, right? George H.W. Bush, a.k.a. the person that ran the Central Intelligence Agency, right?
So, and the person who wanted the presidency.
Right? So you have a very competent person underneath, regardless as to whether or not you like his policies. There's a man that knows how to wield the power of state, right? You get the same thing with his son, George W. Bush, right? You have Dick Cheney behind the scenes being very capable, very competent as far as how he's exercising power, in the name of the United States. You just don't have that with Kamala. They benched her. They brought her on as a pander to ostensibly Black people and people of color, though she doesn't have any deep, great ties to the Black community. In fact, she has as many demerits in the Black community as she has merits. There's a lot of people who out and out loathe her. And she hasn't made any, right. She has not made herself, it's not like she worked over the past 4 years feverishly with Black Lives Matter to bring down, law enforcement, extrajudicial murders of people. Like none of that happened. right? Like not even in a way that like Michelle Obama is beloved in the community. If Michelle Obama ran against Kamala Harris right now, she would trounce her in the black community. I mean, it'd be like 75-20. It would not be close, right? But it was enough for the election. So now you're stuck with this person who doesn't wield the power of state in any kind of a real effective way. I mean, I go back to a month or two when she was in Puerto Rico and she's dancing along and everybody's singing the songs and they're saying essentially Yankee go home. And she doesn't even have her handlers telling her like, oh, they're making fun of you. You know, I think about this whole latest op session with her and Taraji, oh girl, they not like us, where you're just aping these hip hop mannerisms. And it's like, no, baby, you not like us. And we see that, like she'd be a disaster if they ran her individually. And so the Democrats have lost twice. They have this man who they can't control, but they can manage kind of barely. And then they have this woman who is not particularly skilled in statecraft and has no deep connection to the demographic that she's beholding to, right? So they just have to start over again. And this is what I was saying about like the AOC, right? If they had posited Joey B as like just this place saver and kept her out there as the nominal voice of the resistance, they'd be able to slide her in right now. But AOC has never been lower in the eyes of the left than ever. Like all of that is gone. All of that fantasy about, oh my God, is there really a potential leftist Democrat is gone. Like this is a person that's not even to the left of old school Democrats like Dennis Kucinich, right? Like if Dennis Kucinich, who's running for re-election, gets into the House, you'll see immediately how far to the left he is of the so-called squad. And Dennis Kucinich could never become the president. AOC has even less chance of that now.
Okay,
let's get to Dennis Kucinich, but less of a chance than she did.
Yeah, I mean, American politics is a mess. It won't get better. Nothing's going to change, and it's unfortunate, but that's really where we are. Sorry, it's an inconvenient truth. I mean, we're talking about Al Gore.
Yeah, right. Who again, right? The Democrats at this point, if they were to, who could they even bring in that would have the name recognition to do that? I mean, Al Gore is potentially, like you said, somebody who has a name recognition. You don't have to sell him. He can try to act like an environmentalist, in spite of the beginnings of his family's fortune in coal. Yeah. But I just compare and contrast that, right, to like the reformist president of Iran who was just elected, listening to his speech where he talks about, I am going to be the dust under the Iranian people's feet. My presidency exists to serve, and to uplift and bring us into this new, right? Like I could just never imagine an American president talking in these terms. American presidents, I mean, this last debate wasn't even held in front of regular citizens. That's how far removed from the American people our presidential class of politician is. Meanwhile, you have the Iranian president saying, I'm going to be the dust under my people's feet that lift them. I mean, right? Like that.
Yeah, and not to mention, we're talking about France and their leftist coalition. We're talking about, remember the UK elections brought 4 Green Party members, 4 Green Party MPs. Right. And, now you just have people exiting the centrist policies. And in the United States, that's not going to change, at all. And we see that even in places like Nevada, third-party candidates like Jill Stein are not allowed to run. What kind of idea? Like, America's not a democracy. We don't even talk about gerrymandering. People who are not from America probably don't have an understanding of just, we have one day to vote, one day, and it's not even a holiday. While Russia has several weeks, India just went through a damn near 2-month election. Right. But in the United States, we can't do that because it's so privileged to take a day off.
Which we brought up. They had to vote. They had 5 candidates to vote for. They were all allowed to debate nationally and put their positions out. There was a runoff because none of those 5 people got over 50%. So there was not seen as some mandate of the people. And everybody had to come back and vote again. Like, and these are countries that they want you to believe are
undemocratic. It's just ridiculous. Like, stop this, man. Like, this is the thing with Xi. It's got to stop because this is happening with China. You're saying that China is a dictatorship But there are so many things that would suggest that's not true.
The American president said it's a dictatorship less than a year ago.
Right? Well, he called Xi a dictator. I mean, that's even more personal.
But again, to go as deep, this is how Democrats are. I mean, let's not forget that Bernie Sanders called Hugo Chavez a dictator, right? This is how the Democrats are. I mean, this is just what they do. Anything that is to the left of their very nominal leftist positions at best, right? They're greatly to the center of everything in such a way that they'd be to the right of most of these people. I mean, look, Joe Biden is to the right of Le Pen's, and he's treated like, to listen to the Republicans talk about him like some flaming communist, like he's Mao himself. And it's like...
Yeah. It's just their own propaganda working for them. We saw it in The Boys yesterday, you know, all these... This is how they exploit people who are, you know, lonely, disconnected. And they talk about, you know, they always want to talk about POCs. You remember when the governor of New York, she was like, these black kids from the Bronx who've never seen a computer. Hilarious. But, you know, we do know that the
black person from the Bronx.
And yeah, exactly.
More likely.
To think that New York City doesn't have computers and cell phones and Wi-Fi, I mean, it's just ridiculous. But we do see the rural community, people who don't have the same type of access, not talked about. And I read this the other day. Somebody was talking about white people who go to Africa and they don't understand and they don't know any African language. They are considered uneducated, but we don't get that because, again, whiteness dominates. I don't want to get too far into that, but it is important to acknowledge. I want to step away and move to this because we got a lot to talk about. Russia steps up strikes on Ukrainian airfields ahead of F-16 delivery. Russia hit 3 Ukrainian airfields last week, and it is said to destroyed a total of 7 aircraft. It seems like the U.S. continuing to, we were listening to this on Dialogue Works yesterday. They had one of the, their commentators talking about just how much money we constantly send to Ukraine, not to mention the weapons. NATO and Europe also now sending weapons, which we talked about earlier, may come to an end. The United States, again, fitting the bill. Donnie J talked about this in the debates. I just want to get your thoughts on the current state of Ukraine and the conflict. And what are your reaction to this?
Ukraine. Okay. So Atlas News had this report of there are people in propeller-driven planes, like crop duster trainer planes, like when you train someone how to fly for the first time ever, starter planes, right? They're using these planes in military applications to float around and shoot drones out of the sky because they don't have any air defense left. I mean, you're back to using the planes we were using in World War II. Right? Going up against people that are using 5th generation fighters, right? I mean, to say that Ukraine is being devastated is an understatement. All of their airfields, and here's the thing about American technology. When it works great. But when it works, it requires pristine operating conditions, right? If you look at nothing sums this up more than the way an AR-15 works versus the way an AK-47 works, right? The Russians, and the Soviets before them were like, we have to be able to make this thing that can work in anything, drop it in the mud, dirt, war's messy, make sure it's still. Meanwhile, if you get a fleck of sand in your AR-15, that thing is jamming, you have to clean it out, you have to baby it. American military technology, that's the story of you have to baby it. And stuff doesn't get babied, right? So when you're talking about F-16s, the kind of takeoff, the kind of landing strips you need, the kind of airfields you need, they have to be pristine. They can't be the kind of places that are getting bombed and cluster munitions are landing out of the sky and we're just going to patch over this. That's not the way it works.
It's not a cargo plane or a passenger plane. It's a rocket ship that can be steered.
It's
on Earth, yeah.
Right. So, this is the thing. So when they've lost 7 Su-27s, which is it's a 4th generation plane. It's a very good plane. But that's what they were using to support their troops in the Sumy offensive up there by Kharkiv, So now those planes are gone, everywhere they're going. The Russians have taken more than half of Chasiv Yar. They've taken over a city in Ukraine. I can't make this up. Named New York, and they waited. Because the NATO conference is coming up soon, right? This is when they say the Russians don't have a sense of humor. So like now there are all of these stories about how New York is occupied by the Russians. New York has fallen to the Russians, right? Just because they understand. I mean, it's just a terrible soundbite for the Americans. And in many ways, it's more correct than it sounds, because all the Americans have left is finance, and finance is New York, right? In America, the financial heart of the United States is New York, and that's what's not winning this war. They needed Detroit's to win this war. Industrialization, the ability to make tanks fast, make boats fast, make planes fast, and they just can't do that anymore. The Americans have offloaded all of their manufacturing because it's more profitable to do that in other parts of the world. But what that means now is when it comes to a crisis, you can only make what you can buy. And sometimes you can't even buy what is made, because you haven't nationalized these resources. You haven't control. These kind of things used to be seen as huge national security risks. And somewhere, some billionaire got that deregulated. And that's where we are in the state where we are right now. I see all of these stories, Covert Caval always talking about, oh, when will the Russian tanks run out? I don't think the Russian tanks are going to run out, player. I think the Russian tanks are going to keep being refurbished, keep coming out on the line, because they have huge industrial capacity. They're able to produce greater than the entire sum. Their military output is greater than the summed combined power of these NATO nations. Yeah. And that's something that you have to look at before you go to war with someone.
Yeah, again, the state of war has changed. And we see this happen. And this is why I like sports and basketball in particularly. You have a certain style that works. Someone figures out how to nullify or at least, disable in some way that particular strength that you have. And then, that those are poked and prodded at until, those can be changed. And that's the state of war right now. We have this is another, obviously that's one of the biggest news stories. There's tons of big news stories in the world. I want to finish with this. We're hearing now several more numbers for the death toll in Gaza. We've heard 198,000 is now becoming more of a standard than the 30,000 or 35,000 that we've been hearing. The attacks continue, and the people in Gaza continue to suffer not just from the constant bombing, but from mental fatigue, from hunger, from lack of clean water. And we get this, something that many have already known. Haaretz, which is the big newspaper in Israel, confirms Israel.
The liberal newspaper.
Liberal, thank you for that. Whatever liberal is in the state of Israel. Whatever liberal means here in the state of the United States. Right. Fascist white ethno states, or at least desiring to be. Haaretz confirms Israel used the Hannibal Directive on October 7th, including orders to attack any vehicle that drove towards Gaza. Basically what that is the Hannibal Operational Order directs the use of force to prevent soldiers being taken into captivity. And that was employed at 3 army facilities infiltrated by Hamas. So basically saying that something we've been saying, that many people have been saying, that the hostages don't want to, the Israeli officials don't want the hostages to come back. That's bad for their PR. And we also seen that they indiscriminately killed many people at the concert. We've seen several commercials of, look how these people who are just trying to enjoy music were slaughtered and killed, even though it happened in Russia by quote unquote ISIS-K, and there was no conversation. We saw also, we didn't mention this too, one of the attackums being used on a beach in Crimea, or was it Crimea?
It was Crimea.
Yeah.
On a religious holiday where everybody would be out sunbathing at the sea.
Which Russia said they're going to, that's not over. We also seeing that Hezbollah is just bullying them to the northern Israel to the point where they're
the IDF is doing what they do. Shin Bet just assassinated a very high-ranking Hezbollah general last week, but in return they got 200 plus Kastuka missiles fired on the north side. So, it's hard to say who's winning. But that in and of itself becomes a win. It's not hard to say who's winning as far as like a death count in the Gaza, right? Now that they're acknowledging, hundreds of thousands have died finally, right? You talk about the Hannibal Directive. Imagine how horrifying this is. This is an official Israeli government policy that in the event of hostilities from an Arab nation or particularly Palestinians, right, if there's any question at all, if the soldiers or the population are going to be taken captive, just kill them. So what that's done is that tainted any October 7th narrative about numbers, period. Because it'll be very difficult to ever ascertain how many people were literally actually killed by Qassam and Hamas and how many were killed by the Israelis. The only people that could investigate such a thing would be the Israelis. Far too much time has happened between the events. It's not like the United Nations was able to get in and get fact finders on the ground and look at the scorch marks and the shelling, and right? I mean, it's been a year. That crime scene is done. So like any number that came out of October 7th is now fugazi because you have no idea how many were killed by the insurgents and how many were killed by the actual IDF. And that is a chilling fact. Americans have looked the other way sometimes when Israelis have killed American Israelis. I think about the whole Rachel Correa, back in I think 2014, right? But
she was in front of the bulldozer.
Right, and they ran over them.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And there were no repercussions.
No consequences, right?
But at the same time, I don't know if we've ever seen something officially executed by a state that's a de facto ally of the United States, where they killed their own population just to save themselves the embarrassment of having Israelis captured. And even with that. So now you have to look at the people that were going, right? You're put in this very weird place where you have to wonder, how many of those people went with Hamas to save their lives? You're literally in a Sarah Connor situation. Come with me if you want to live. You see them Apaches coming? They're not just coming for me, buddy. They're coming for all of us. Everyone here right now is a target. If you want to live, come with me. Yeah. And that explains why you've seen some of this behavior, right, out of the people. First off, no one really knows what's happening with these people that are, let's say, captive, right, in the Gaza right now. But you do know when they come out, mostly they're saying, we lived as good as a Palestinian lived, which is shocking. Any incidents of starvation now become a de facto indictment of the Israeli process, which is not allowing there to be food, sent to they're starving the entire Gaza, which is, again, not just a war crime, but a stated that's one of the tenets of what it looks like to create a genocide. So
it looks as if, again, the forever wars continue. Everywhere the United States is involved in, there seems to be questions on how to move forward. Russia and Ukraine, you don't see a path forward, even though there are small conversations here about peace agreements or whatever that may be.
There's thought Viktor Orban would become the voice of unification. So, for those of y'all that don't know, I think this is where you're going. The prime minister of Hungary went to Russia, went to Ukraine. He spoke to Zelensky. He spoke to Putin. Now he's on his way to China to find out, how can we bring this to an end? This is went on past bedtime and we need to end it. What do we need? And what's so funny is Stoltenberg, who shouldn't even have any power anymore because he's on the way out. He's no longer, he's not who the new Secretary General of NATO is going to be. He's like, Orban doesn't speak for us. He doesn't have the power to make any deals. Like, I thought stopping the war was what was the most important, right? Because it's the Ukrainians that are losing. So to keep the war going on, all you're doing is you're getting your allies murdered. The Russians are just fine where they're at right now. They've shown the ability to open up fronts wherever they want to take land and hold land, to force the Ukrainian forces to redirect forces, which tells you one really important thing from a military point of view. It tells me you're out of reserves. If you're having to redirect forces from this front to that front, it means you ain't got no new skin to put into the game. So.
We've already heard from military officials previously that in a lot of ways, the United States military is in tatters. They don't have the proper safety equipment. They said less than 5% of military installations are up to code. 5% of their fire extinguishers are up to date. And we see that happening, in a lot of these Western countries where they make these, what we like to call wowie zowie weapons, when what we see winning are manpower, drones. I mean, the same things that have been working for quite some time, that Russia has been using for quite some time. Tanks, being able to hit tanks with FPV drones and all these other things. There doesn't look like there's any let up. The United States continues to fund that. There doesn't look like there's any let up. There's no resolution of any kind. We're getting close to a year here of the G side in Gaza right now. There's no resolution in front of us. Domestic issues, whether it's student loan debt, whether it's homelessness, no resolutions of any kind. There is no light at the end of the tunnel, especially here in the United States, but many places because of the United States. And it seems as if the rest of the world is paying attention. The rest of the world hears it. And the United States, the people who live here, some people are kind of diverging to this path of trying to be more radical and trying to move towards a third party system. But we know that that's probably not going to happen, at least in the next election. And most Americans don't even have Russia and Ukraine on their mind. You see more and more the G side in Gaza, less reported on. People are talking about it less.
It's a criminal act now in Congress, right? I mean, they passed a bill to not even talk about the death count. I mean,
did you see the German bill that they're banning the triangle emoji?
Freedom.
Yeah, and mind you, you have to, if you want to become a German citizen. I mean, this hasn't passed, but
essentially an allegiance oath to Israel. You have to say that you believe in Israel's right to exist. Why does no one have to swear that they believe in Palestine's right to exist, right? I mean,
yeah. Everywhere you go, it's difficult for Palestinians to get jobs. It's difficult for people who are pro-Palestinian to stay on campuses and get an education. It seems like everywhere you turn, there is a propaganda commercial, whether it be from Israel, whether it be on a website you're on, whether it's a commercial, whether it's a song that they're trying to push or anything of that nature. There is no freedom of speech here. There's intense propaganda all over the United States, which is why the rest of the world is like, you know what, and this is what my point was, and what I'm trying to make is, remember when they went to war in Iraq, they said, oh, I'm not here to start a war, I'm here to end one. They already used that one again in Ukraine. They already used that we got to beat Trump, he's the worst ever, and then we got Biden. We already are seeing that these same narratives aren't working, and the Democratic Party and centrist parties all over the world are experiencing losses. And I hope Americans can wake up.
The one thing I
not to be Spike Lee with it,
have been very, very skillful about is rebranding it, right? Because that's what they're doing now, is they're making it an ableist argument. They're making it an ageist argument, right? So instead of talking about Joe Biden's treatment of the Palestinians and the fact that he's been a genocide supporter, a genocide enabler, right? He's just, you're making fun of him because he had a bad debate. That's why you don't
D.L.
like
him, Hughley was saying
stutters. That. It's like, I've watched his career for as long as I've been alive. This man has been in politics. He's been in politics longer than I've been alive. I remember, all of those things. I remember corn pop. I remember racialized jungle. I remember the crime bill. I remember his treatment of Anita Hill. I remember him loving Clarence Thomas, voting for Clarence Thomas, right? Like, these are the things I remember. I remember him voting for the Iraq War. I don't remember him ever being right in a position of policy, ever. I don't remember ever once being like, oh, wow, that's a Joe Biden policy, and I'm for that. Like,
He's a
never in my
complete
life.
instrument of the deep state and has been since he joined politics, period. And, they want this decrepit, senile, racist, segregationist to again run, which against, an equally horrible candidate. And won't change it up even if they want to win.
Joe Biden is the only person doesn't make Trump look inadequate and inept. I mean, imagine you got the one guy on earth that you can have that somehow makes Trump seem like he's not completely incompetent. Like, this is just the Democrats' ability to snatch defeat from the mouth of victory. I mean, they have an innate ability, man. Critical fail.
Just want to say shout out to the podcast listeners. We're on podcasts and you can't get on YouTube. Hit us up on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, all those good things. We have a Patreon. You see it on the bottom. I'm not going to plug it too much. You can get these cool shirts, but I think these shirts are about to be out of print. I think we're going to have some new ones coming along the way. That's why you got to strike while the iron is hot, my friend.
It is.
I want to we have some Patreon members and I want to make sure I show them some love because they're helping us keep this thing going. We got 2 platinum members, Jay Ghoul Art 94 and Lissa. Big shout out to them. They definitely are getting one of these shirts and maybe some more. We also have got a silver. I'm just making this up as I go. I'm going to go, this is a silver tier member. I want to give a shout out to Paula and then also everyone else who donates anything of any kind. And of course, we're so appreciative of No Ground, Robbie, Lawrence, Suzette, and Dennis. I think that's everybody. Much love to y'all. Any thoughts before we get out of here, Tanky? Go out there, get that new Little Tanky album, Section 762's Pro Popolo. If you know, you know. I'm Amin TMK. This is Inner City Left. We out. Peace.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' Inner City Left.